to you. Okay. All right, gentlemen. So to get started with this conversation about charging infrastructure in Europe, we're going to start off with a quote. So listen carefully, or are we going to see it up there? Even better. So this is a quote from Eric Jonert, the Secretary General of the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, and he said, even though all manufacturers are expanding their portfolios of electric cars, we unfortunately see that market penetration of these vehicles is quite weak and patchy across the European Union. So to discuss this, I have two questions for our panelists, and they'll each have just 5 minutes to answer these two questions with just a few slides. So the question that I have is, what will it take to make the e-mobility market in Europe take off? And how is your company going to contribute to that? So we sort of agreed who's going to go first, who's going to go second, who's going to go third. So now I'd like to hand over the floor to Elias Po. So you will begin.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elias Po, and I'm representing a company called Virta. We are basically the digital platform for EV charging, doing business in 15 countries in Europe, and providing the digital platform for all kinds of and all sizes of players to be able to provide charging as business. So, my background is in building digital services and disruption. So I was thinking of maybe to disrupt this panel a little bit also, and so instead of a panel, I prepared a keynote, but it's going to be short. So, why I start with 15 trends of EV charging? This event is about EV charging. The question was right. What could be done? What can we do? I think that the role is in the charging, not necessarily in the car. Let's do the charging part first. The first ones to have EV charging as a real business are the players who build EV charging. So I'm going to introduce quickly, like Pecha Kucha style, the 15 trends we believe are the future right now. That will answer your question. So first of all, EV charging is already an established business with extensive growth. Depending on the market is growing 40 to 80% PA. We are already here. This has been a business for quite a few years already, so there are professionals in the market. So the charging is happening, and we need the charging as an enabler to get more cars. People have to trust that charging is everywhere and it works. So if you're slower than these 40 to 80 per country, then you are slow in market growth. Second thing, we are seeing already commercially profitable charging networks emerge. What kind of networks are they then? Well, they are not the networks that have full stack from their own chargers to everything in between until the end user experience, because that has been a heavy investment to build, and you have to invest heavily to that business further on. But rather, the businesses that will succeed profitably already in coming years are the ones who have very thin own structure. They use efficiently platforms, because digital platform, it's all about sharing the assets and making the value that way. And of course, it's about locations. So location, location, location. Number 3, if there are profitable players already in charging business, I would say that the digital platforms who enable the business, they are going to be investing so heavily in the next few years that profits are not inside there. In order to become one of the biggest or the greatest platforms, you really need to invest, you really need to be innovative, and you have to move fast. So we are one of the companies trying to build this kind of platform in order to enable end-to-end services to the profitable CPOs. Number 4, the world is changing, so all kinds of alliances are forming. Some of them are based on contractual structure, some of them based on acquisitions. But the new players in the market are the traditional players of mobility, and we are going to see more disruptions than the one as an example on the slide at the moment. So we believe that alliances are formed and the business is done by networks, by ecosystems. So that gives us a polarized situation. On the other hand, we have on the right side the traditional business models where you have the whole value chain, you have your own chargers, own customer, and you have your own installation and everything. And then you try to have a proprietary service where you don't let anybody else in. And on the other side, on the left side, we see what we call gravity-based ecosystems. And what we believe is that gravity-based ecosystems are the key to this business, because it's not about the size your network is, it's about how big you are together with your partners, it's about your capability and your offering and your impact. And so that's why the network structure will be different. Number 6, different kind of roles are emerging. So the kind of the limits between whether you're a charge point owner or a service provider will blur. There will be also new kind of services where individuals can be the service providers as well as owning the charging point and so on. There are also new ways of integrating the car and the charging service. ISO 15118 as a standard you probably know. Other things that we will be seeing, I'm not sure about what's going to be heard tomorrow from Audi, but these services are also becoming services inside the car. That's our belief. We are going to see in the next year already OEMs striving for a role in energy retail. It's probable they're going to bypass the current energy retailers, and instead they try to take the role and they push grid companies to support them and build grids strong enough that we can work that way. Number 9, the business models polarize between hardware-based business ecosystem models, hardware and ecosystem models. So basically hardware model is like a traditional gas station model. You have your hardware somewhere and you build your business on that. But the ecosystems where everybody can use all infra will definitely be more profitable. And the service provisioning in like real estate and so on, it's definitely kind of unbundling so that there is the asset ownership one place and the service provision on the other. Number 10, no more switchbox cabinet looking chargers. So there's a lot happening on the hardware side, new standards, new technologies, new faster chargers coming in, but also we are seeing much design and style instead of the traditional, very electricity-based looks. Number 11, charging services connect to energy services. I think this is a must in order to keep the grids alive, to avoid overloads, but also to bring money into the EV ecosystem in order to make the EV ecosystem reliable and kind of make EVs cheaper for individuals. Number 12, we believe that smart home charging gains ground. There are new players coming into smart home charging with reasonably priced, intelligent equipment, and also energy sector wants to take advantage of smart charging and the benefits of smart charging in the near future. And what comes to energy services, we are going to have also extensive projects and rollouts of V2G, vehicle-to-grid, materialize. And what's the difference between V2G and doing demand response in traditional energy services, like just limiting the charging? The difference is that if I charge my Tesla for 4 hours, it's full. And so I can do business with demand response only these 4 hours. But if I have bidirectional charging, I can do business 24 hours. So that brings also money into the energy side. Number 14, we are going to see stationary battery storages integrated into EV charging. They will be both in homes as well as on charging sites, public charging sites. And finally, we're going to see the second generation of digital user experience. So I think that the app is the dominant thing. Nobody uses anything else than mobile services anymore. And the next generation services will combine new innovative, intuitive features like home charging, energy, so on, so on. So this is how the charging will change the world, and the cars are then coming later. Thank you.
All right, many thanks indeed. From Virta, Elias, so next up we have from Slovakia, from GreenWay, Peter Badík. So shall I repeat my questions? What will it take to make the e-mobility market take off in Europe, and how will your company contribute to that?
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter, and I'm co-founder of GreenWay. Slide is over here. Yeah, great. Yes, question what's to have a rollout of electric vehicles. I think we need infrastructure, obviously. But the infrastructure will not fall out of the sky. And actually what we need as well is the companies which will be able to deliver that infrastructure. So in the beginning, allow me a very short excursus to basic economics of charging business. And I would like to point your attention to two economics relations, which is, I think, crucial for this business. The first one is that the size matter. This business is very much based on the economics of scale. You need to set up a certain operation, certain processes, certain team, certain, let's say, resources in order to facilitate your infrastructure and to deliver. It doesn't matter if you talk about 100 charging points or if you're talking about 10,000 charging points. Basically, you still always need a certain resources to run that. It doesn't matter if you are serving 1,000 customers or 100,000 customers. Basically, certain basic things need to be done in order to deliver the proper user experience. So you need to have a certain scale to grow. And as you can see that the certain costs are not really growing as your revenues are growing. And the second economic relations is the utilization. Actually, it's a holy grail of this business. This is a heat map which we use for assessing of the investment into the new chargers. As you can see that based on the nature of the investment, where a big part of the costs are fixed, depreciation, which doesn't rely on a real use of the charger, but rather they are fixed during the whole life. We crunch the numbers and we see that there's a completely different story if you are building infrastructure in a market where you have low or high utilization. So there are certain economic relations which needs to be fulfilled. And everything boils down to number of electric vehicles on the market, the number of electric vehicles you are able to serve. So what we really need, what the companies in this kind of industry needs in order to deliver the infrastructure is basically a stability and understanding how the number of electric vehicles will be and what will be the rollout of electric vehicles. We need to understand when we will move from this kind of, hocus pocus, trying to fit electric vehicles into the body of combustion engine car, into this. We need to understand when the OEMs will really start to roll out this kind of stuff. And it's nice to say we will have 1 million electric vehicles sold in 2030. From marketing point of view, it's very nice. But we need much more detailed information for next 2-3 years. We need to feed this number into the model, into the graphs which I show you. We need to know in next 2 years what models, when, what numbers, what volumes. We need to plan. And if we have this, and I can assure you that we have many very clever companies in this business which can deliver the infrastructure. I see a lot of them here in the audience. We can activate many resources. We can activate human resources. We can activate financial resources. We can deliver the infrastructure. I think actually the chicken and egg problem doesn't exist. I would suggest that in Europe, in terms of the charging infrastructure, we are well ahead of EV rollout. We are 2-3 steps ahead, but and we are able to scale up. I'm not saying that we are done. We are not done, but we can scale it up, but we need to have a stability. So I urge every OEMs to be very clear about their plans for next upcoming years, to give us stability to us as an industry, to prepare for rollout of infrastructure, and then everything goes well. And now just to address what we do to make it happen. This is our network, which in Central and Eastern Europe, basically what we do in GreenWay, we try to bring this infrastructure to Central and Eastern Europe. As you can see, we have a lot of things to do. We are not finished yet, definitely. Our charging partners in Western Europe, where the network is much more dense, are ahead of us, but we are doing our best to bring a lot of charging points on one side, and on the other side, bring a unique user experience so the user of electric vehicles can feel comfortable during the charging. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Peter Badík from GreenWay. And now from NTT Data, Oliver Koeth.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, my name is Oliver, and I will be addressing the same questions, but maybe from a different perspective. So we do software, and we work across many industries. And the perspective I would like to bring into the question of what it needs that the market takes off is the perspective of the customer. And I believe we also have to focus on customer experience so that charging is really easy, that the data we provide about charging stations is good, is reliable, charging stations are reliable, and that the usability is very good. So at the end, charging an electric vehicle should be as simple as calling an Uber, and that is really, really simple. Unfortunately, in our reality, it's not so simple. This was last Saturday when I was pulling up the Hubject app, and when we look at that only 50% of the charging stations are really available, then I see that we as a community still have a lot of work to do so that people can really use the infrastructure that's already in the place. Another important aspect for me is incentives. So since this is a young industry, we need to incentivize customers to go into this. We should look at the pull so that people really see that they are part of a movement that goes in the right direction. We could incentivize them, for example, with better inner-city access, with inner-city parking, or even with an integration into other forms of mobility. And that's the third element I would like to allude to, that we should look at a holistic approach. So I believe if we only look at e-mobility being a like-to-like replacement for the combustion engine, I think we are not using its fullest potential. We should also look at different kinds of ownerships, flexible access, regardless whether it's car sharing or ride sharing. Latest, when we look at the autonomous driving, we will see that the industries are actually merging. Where's the difference between a Uber and a Drive Now if the vehicle is an autonomous vehicle? There's no difference anymore. So from that, what is NTT Data doing in this area? First one, kind of a personal statement. I built my own charging station last summer. That's my personal contribution to this. Doesn't live up to the design standards that Elias has alluded to, but of course, we as a company, we look at the bigger scale. So we are providing a charging controller that's really independent of the actual underlying hardware. So we are not venturing into the space of the vertical integration. We leave that to customers. So our customers have all options on how they set up their service. We are providing a backend, and this backend is getting more and more professional. We all see that now that the industry is becoming more mature, that we have to do with more regulations. Data protection law was something that kept us very busy this year. Calibration regulation is another one, and also the functional enhancements in regards to smart charging and load distribution is what we are working on. But I think we should not stop at the narrower scope of electrical vehicle charging. We should also look at how the industry evolves and how the industry merges. There was a good example that there are now mergers coming and the industry is reconfiguring. And we believe that technology like blockchain can help. I like that saying that blockchain is the new HTTP, so we can really link companies and link systems, and we can combine the transaction for information and the transaction for value, and that also will speed up the growth. So that's it from my side, and back to you.
Thank you very much. So short. Thank you very much, but now we'd like to sort of broaden our conversation, and this morning we heard about China's EV market and its incredibly rapid expansion. So can we learn from them? What can Europe learn from China? Elias, it's a complicated question, but I would put it to you first.
Well, first of all, I have to say that I admire the Chinese way of doing things that fast. And I was, in the beginning of the week, in another seminar discussing this with also EU decision makers. And I see the problem in a way that China can, for instance, electrify whole Shenzhen bus fleet in less than 2 years, while in Europe it takes 7 years to implement the legislation. So we are then 5 years behind already. And this is something that we should fix. So maybe deregulate things that we want to go smoothly and move faster. That's one thing.
Okay, so deregulation. Any other thoughts on what we heard perhaps this morning that we could apply here in Europe?
I think regulation is definitely one of the topic, but I think the major difference between Europe and China is that if you look on the industry, I mean mainly automotive industry, they look at it from a different angle. In China, they look at it as a chance, as an opportunity. Maybe even opportunity to reshape the internal industry in China, but even maybe to export in the future the electric vehicles out of China. In Europe, we are looking on electromobility, industry in general, looking on it as a threat. As a threat which needs to be accepted, but the threat which needs to be managed. And that's a big difference. That's a difference in delivery. That's what I said. We see the plans, we see a lot of words, we see the big ambitions, numbers, many years ahead, but we don't know what we are going to do and what's going to happen in the next 2 years. And that's the difference between China and Europe.
Okay, so the attitudes, you would say, towards this emerging technology in Europe, people are afraid of it, you would say, or you say it as a threat?
No, people, industry. I think people are not afraid. I think there is the demand for electric vehicles here. If you look on waiting times for new models of electric vehicles in Europe, it's 6-8 months easily. So that's no doubt. There is a demand for that. The approach of automotive industry is completely different in China and in Europe.
Okay,
and you can look at it from a perspective. Look what European OEMs are doing. They are launching the EV models in China first.
Right. Okay, Oliver, what do you think?
I've been working and living in China from 2012 to 2015, and so I was really enjoying that atmosphere, that speed. But when you look at regulation and deregulation, and for example, they took away all the small motorcycles and replaced them by electric. And if you think about that in Europe, and the European Union would push that down into every country, then there will be the next exits from somewhere. So I think we cannot really rely on this push from the government, but we as Europeans have to find a way how to pull people in this. I think we are more mature, maybe also from the political side. So it's a more difficult task, but I think we have to get into that pull, and we have to find some incentives, both for the industry and for the users, and that has to go hand in hand. And I think we have to communicate more about the chances and not so much about the risks. Maybe difficult for Germans, and that is what I see we can learn from a little bit from what they do, but I think we have to find different ways on how to implement it in Europe.
All right, so you mentioned the role of governments and incentives, and again, to compare it to what's going on in China, the Chinese government is very much supporting the development and investments. Are we too skeptical about government interference in Europe, especially in light of current moods, I would say, among many countries towards Brussels, towards the EU, as taking more of an active role in regulating things or insisting on certain standards or practices? Is it likely that we're going to see the EU as an entity get involved?
Yeah, I don't think that the Chinese government is really supporting it. I think they are driving it. I think that's the difference. And so I think we have to find our own way. And I see that Elias has something to add here.
So Elias, is the European governments doing enough?
Well, on the other hand, if you look at the European perspective, one of the very few things that the European Union has been very successful throughout the years has been environmental policies. So now we have to just drive the same environmental policies to the OEM sector as well. And for instance, one way to do that would be to set a target year for zero CO2. And that's something that we have suggested on the name of Euroelectric, so European Energy Industry.
Well, you mentioned the EU's role in promoting sort of green energies and caring about pollution and all this sort of thing. And I know that the EU is planning on making it mandatory to integrate charging stations in every new building. Is this a good idea?
Well, I think it's a good start. that's something that drives the change. And of course, the directive was kind of watered down in a way that it's not that big thing anymore. And the investment to new buildings is very small, so definitely it's worthwhile.
Okay, so you think it's a good step, but it's not sufficient, so the EU could be doing more. What kinds of things? Could you give us some examples of the kinds of policies or regulations that you would like to see the EU introduce to support the e-mobility market? Does anyone else want to answer first?
Well,
okay, go ahead, to follow up.
The zero CO2 year would be something, because that would send a signal that we are going to demand zero CO2. If the car industry won't get there at that year, then they pay penalties, but also it would mean investment decisions. So I think this is the most crucial one. Also, we are now getting a lot of new EU legislation once it's implemented in 5 years. And this legislation, at least the EU commissioners say, will impact heavily on what kind of fleet do we see in next 5 years or by 2030.
Okay, Oliver, I think you seemed like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, well, I think a hard target, of course, motivates people. The question is, can we also incentivize people? And so instead of regulating and saying we need to have this box in every house, is there maybe some kind of subsidy to implementing these boxes, similar to what we have seen in the area of solar energy? But then not only providing these boxes, but maybe also thinking about what could be the business models behind that for the house owners. Is there any support for peer-to-peer models, for example? Can we integrate this also in networks for rural areas? So I think they should think a little bit further than just the regulation and putting something in, but then how to put this into a good use. And I think that's something where we could need some more support.
In terms of the charging infrastructure business, maybe I think a very big role of either EU or governments in taking this risk of late rollout of electric vehicles out of the charging service providers. So again, I'm going back to this economics, basically one of the most important variable is when the electric vehicles will be on the market, when. And if it's late, who should take this risk? It should be the commercial companies, or should they share this risk, for example, with EU or with the governments? So if this is not going to happen, if it's going to be prolonged for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it has certain economic impact. And if we find smart tools, financials, risks, whatever, which will enable to share this kind of rollout, late rollout risk between the commercial operators and governments, because it is in a favor or in a interest of governments to make this infrastructure on the ground, then that's one of the best way to help this industry. Because I believe the industry is strong enough and matured enough to tackle everything else except of this risk.
If I may continue just a little bit, I think that the subsidies, if we need subsidies should be given to the EVs and not the charging. The charging is something that, first of all, it can stand alone as it is business, and secondly, people want chargers, people want the ability to charge, people want these EVs, and also companies and society wants charging. So there is customer base for charging. The problem is the cars, like you said, and we need more cars. By the way, taking back to China, the discussion, I believe that we are going to see the Chinese EVs in the markets way before the European ones, but maybe they are going to be with familiar brands like Volvo or Daimler, which is now has biggest owner, Chinese company. So this is all happening.
Okay, so you say we don't need so many incentives for charging, we need more for the cars themselves. I want to touch on one other thing that's very different between China and Europe when we talk about is obviously, Europe is not just one country. So we may have, the EU and European regulations, but then the individual member states have their own policies and their own priorities and their own budgets, I dare say. And if we perhaps look at Eastern European countries, I think it's safe to say that for a long time they've been considered the underdogs of e-mobility. Peter, can you talk to us a little bit about specifically the challenges and the opportunities in Eastern European countries going forward? We do know there have been significant developments catching up, so to speak. Where are we with e-mobility in Eastern Europe?
Yeah. It's no doubt that the adoption rate is somehow slower, that's for sure. On the other side, if you look on as well on other technologies, we saw, I mean, completely out of the electromobility, I'm talking, for example, about debit payment cards or internet or many things. We saw that these countries were able to ramp up very quickly and sometimes even go faster than Western European countries. So I believe that this will be the case for electric vehicles as well, electromobility. The electromobility as a phenomenon is, I think, will spread all around the world and will not have a border, so we will see it everywhere at the end. Yes, sure, maybe the difference is now, let's say, how much public support is given, if there is enough money, for example, on the level of cities to subsidize or to build the infrastructure. So that's causing then that's the reason why we are lagging behind. On the other side, I used to say that we are lucky to learn on the mistakes of someone else. So we don't have to repeat the mistakes. We will definitely do by ourselves some of them, but we don't have to repeat the mistake which was done somewhere else.
Do you possibly see Eastern Europe surpassing the Western European countries that have been sort of doing this longer, but as you say, the Eastern neighbors can learn from their mistakes and maybe do things better from the get-go?
Eventually, maybe yes, hard to predict. But maybe about this one country and many countries, I see it as well as a kind of advantage because, yes, in Europe it's more complex, you have many countries and so on and so forth, but on the other side you have different, then you can test the different models, different approaches. So now, what we have a unique in Europe, you can go to Norway and you can learn from them. It's a 5 million people country, but they are a great laboratory for EV deployment. You can learn how the market behaves in a high penetration level and so on and so forth. So in this respect, it's inspiring, and this inspiration could then be adopted by other countries. So from certain perspective, I'm even happy that we are not everybody on the same level.
Elias, want to add something? Yeah.
Yes, and maybe it would be important also in EU policy and European policy to understand that countries are different. So we should support the forerunners and take advantage of their markets and learn, like you said. And on the other hand, we shouldn't push too much effort on the laggards and how they are coming behind, because we are creating the Me Too phenomena, that people want also these cars in the countries where there is penetration is not that big, when the major best countries or best developers can achieve bigger EV penetrations.
All right, well, especially in Europe, of course, we want to be able to drive all across Europe and have a seamless charging experience, a seamless driving experience, but EV drivers in Europe are still having a hard time when it comes to charging their vehicles. So why is that? What's the biggest problem that you feel? Maybe we can begin.
I mean, we see that these initiatives are developed locally. I mean, we do have some roaming capabilities like provided here in Hamburg, but I think also historically there are different regulations, different standards in the countries, and that makes it difficult to have this operation. And maybe we should also differentiate between what is a technical interoperability and what is the interoperability that we can give to the customers. And is it for the customers easy to roam? And to what extent is it for the OEMs, for example, easy to build to a single standard? And that are for me two questions. And on one hand, I would say let's do customers first, and let's see that we can get the seamless experience to the customers, even if in the technical background we maybe need some workarounds. And that, I think, is something we should focus on.
So Peter, how important is interoperability for your business?
Definitely is, but you know, this interoperability issue, you need to understand that this industry is still evolving, and it's evolving from a certain level. And if I look experience of my country, for example. There are two types of charging service providers. One, I call them professionals, and one which are not professionals. Every charging point at this stage of development of electromobility is important. Even a cable hanging out of the window where you can charge and pay somewhere for €2 to someone, it's good because, especially in the countries where you don't have such a dense network, it's great that you have at least some possibility. But on the other side, so if I look on a number of charging points, and it's more visible in Eastern Europe, but it's still as well in Western Europe, there are still more those which are not run on professional way. It's good that we have it, but you cannot roam with a cable which is hanging out of the window. And that's what I think people perceive as a lack of interoperability. Because I think the professional CPOs, professional EMPs, they are able to set up the roamings, they are able to roam between each other, and this is the processes. But for these processes, you need the money, you need a certain level of professionalism, certain level of investment. And so therefore, I don't want to underestimate the problem of interoperability, but I think there is a lot of misunderstanding in this. So not every charging point in my country could be interoperable and will never be. But there could be a professional services which can easily integrate between each other.
I see basically two problems of the bad user experience, and one being that the previous hardware in DC side on the fast charging, it was been totally crap. So the quality of this technology, it hasn't been a ready technology, so it has caused a lot of problems and a lot of bad experience for EV users. But then the ones who don't use EVs, I think they are the ones complaining about the networks most. At least I know in Finland, most EV drivers feel that they can charge where they want, and mostly it's at home. And this thing is kind of in order. Of course, the housing companies and these are still the problem, but yes, but that's changing, exactly.
Should we stop at striving for EU interoperability, or are we striving ultimately to have global interoperability, or is that just too far away?
Well, as a user experience, probably we should strive for global interoperability, but then again, what kind of technologies or players are needed to build that? I don't believe in one player model. So there are several players in the ecosystem, and the gravity of the ecosystem gives them different kind of roles.
Anyone else want to add to that? Oliver?
Yeah, again, it's on the customer side, yes, for sure. On the technical side, every interoperability also means kind of a trade-off between complexity on one hand, because you have to adhere to more standards. On the other hand, it's maybe easier for you as an OEM to build against a more complex standard instead of building against 10 simple standards. But I think at global level, it will be too complex. So I would really focus on a good user experience. Maybe also think of different levels of integration. I mean, the protocols that Hubject is supporting, they are very comprehensive. On the other hand, when you bring that example of the less professional networks, then maybe a PayPal QR code could already help. And if that gives the user at the end the possibility to charge the car, then this is what we ultimately want. We want it to be easy and accessible. And how we achieve it, maybe we have to be a bit flexible with this, but always with the customer in mind, and not so much focused on the technology. The technology we can build, but we should focus on enabling the customer to achieve his or her goal.
Okay, so you're saying we shouldn't focus that much on technologies, we should focus more on the customer, what the customer needs in their experience, and yet what a few people have already mentioned today is the new technology like the plug and charge, this ISO 15118, I was told is how, I don't say 15118. What is this standard, what kind of an impact is this going to have on the charging market in Europe? Is it going to push things forward?
I mean, it's in general a trend that software is more and more getting into the products, and I would even slightly disagree with one of your 15 slides, and that is the one that the app at the end is the means that we deliver our services, because I believe we need to integrate the digital functions into the physical products. So what else do I need to tell the system if I plug my car into that station? Then I want to charge to the car. And if there are some choices to make, then I would like to make them immediately at the car, maybe at the screen that then pops up at exactly that place with some augmented reality or whatever. So I see we should really be more integrating the services into the products.
I think that's a good comment. And by the way, I also had a slide about integrating the services in the car. There are certain services you can use inside your car, but as your slide said, mobility as a service and new ways of using mobility are coming. So basically, you have much more than a car to use when you use your mobility services. That's why I believe in the app being the #1 user interface. And to your question, yes, it will definitely make new services possible and enable better user interfaces and better services for the end users. But the question we haven't kind of touched yet is that you were saying, for instance, that gives opportunity for OEM to provide these services. Who says that OEM should be in charge of the energy that the mobility uses? So that's something that the game is not yet even started. There are multiple players in this value chain, and how will the pieces in the value chain go together? That's something that we have to see, and that's up to the market.
Peter?
Just a very last comment, and maybe very technically specific about this plug and charge and new ISO and so on and so forth. I believe we need to remain on an open platform. We
need to remain on
an open platform. So the collaboration needs to be. It shouldn't be something which is tied to certain technology, to certain provider, to OEMs, to whomever else. You know, that we have a long experience from other industries, telecom, from the internet industry, and this kind of stuff. Yes, we need the standards, we need a technology, but it should be open for many players to compete on that. So that's the last comment. Otherwise,
I'd actually like to leave enough time for our audience members to ask questions, but I'll just have one more question for all three of you, and just kind of a silly one. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the European EV charging market, like poof, what would it be? One thing.
I would align the attitude of the industry with the attitude of the users, because I believe the users and drivers are here for electric vehicles. They want to have it. Just to let's realize that fact. We have many examples and proofs, and let's align these things.
Okay, so we need change of attitudes among industry.
And I would maybe want to merge capabilities, because I think we have many great solutions in certain areas, regardless whether it's vehicles or charging platforms or whatever. But I think it's not yet a fully integrated system that is easy to use. And I would like that these capabilities, these best practices are better integrated. So I think the individual solutions are there, but it's not yet a system that is integrated and really works at the level that we want to have it.
So too many cooks, we want more integration, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe we keep the cooks, but maybe they talk more.
Okay, talking cooks.
And exchange recipes, at least on a certain level.
Yeah. Okay, Elias?
Or maybe I continue with the deregulation. So we should ensure that we don't get country-specific regulations for charging. I think Germany might be seen even as a warning example of the German LSB. So we should deregulate these kind of things. We shouldn't demand for MID meters in the chargers, but we should let the open commercial business freely work and do their business.
Okay.
Laissez-faire.
So less hindrance through regulation. Okay. Thank you very much to all three of you gentlemen for sharing your insights with us today. Mr. Peter Badík from GreenWay, Oliver Koeth from NTT Data, and Elias Po from Virta Ltd. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for talking to us.